I was always taught, practice makes perfect, but more so perfect practice makes perfect. But really it's perfect practice makes perfect practice because you're practicing to practice. You're getting really good at practicing without getting good at doing it for real.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am really excited about today's interview, today's conversation, because it's with a guy that I've known for, 15 years at least, Matt Kirtley.
Probably that. I think so.
And, we've exchanged messages online. We've been in the same forums forever, and we've never actually talked face to face. So I'm just absolutely thrilled to welcome Matt to the podcast. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I was thinking about the same thing. We've been interacting for probably as long as I've done jiu-jitsu, just a little bit after, probably when I was a blue belt. But I don't think I've ever actually spoken to you.
No.
With all messages and emails and Facebook chats.
Well, that is an amazing byproduct of having a podcast, is that I can actually reach out and connect with people that I wanted to connect with for a long time. And it'd just be awkward, like, hey, Matt, do you just want to FaceTime or something for an hour? That would be awkward. But now, since we're doing a podcast, it's this benediction of something I want to do anyway. So how long have you been doing jiu-jitsu?
I think I started in 2004. That's the best I can figure. And I was thinking, I kind of stopped last year because of COVID, but yeah, so since then. And the other thing I was thinking about was how different things were back then on the internet, because the big jiu-jitsu site was the BJJ.org when it was black and blue. Remember that ugly site?
100%.
It was all photos. So I remember at the time I had, I think the week I got my blue belt, I took a series of photos of a technique and put it online. And there was nothing that special about it other than I took a lot of photos. And so you were one of the first
cutting edge at the time.
Yeah, you really helped feed my ego at that time, because you were, this is great, can I put it up on my site? And I'm like, wow, yeah, great. I'm a blue belt, I'm on this website. Because it was such a different time then. There was no YouTube, there was no Instagram or anything. So to get your stuff up on a site, you would have to post it to your own site or get somebody else to do it.
The discussion around BJJ culture is a really interesting one. I guess I'm one major generation ahead of you. But when I started jiu-jitsu, it was so liberating coming to jiu-jitsu from the traditional martial arts, where it was Sifu this, Sensei that, Senpai this, Sijo that, Master, Grandmaster, all that crap, going to jiu-jitsu, which was demonstrably more effective than the other martial arts I'd been doing. And at the same time was much, much, much more casual, because it was a first name basis. Didn't matter if the guy was a 4th degree black belt. At the time, it was a first name basis, at least with everybody I interacted with. And then I've observed over the last, call it 25 years, this switch towards, professor this and all these honorifics being used, and it creeping back towards more of a traditional martial art convention of master up here, student down here. Here are the names that we use. Here's the procedures. Is this something that you observed? You've been active in the Pennsylvania area. Yes?
Yeah, I've been in Pennsylvania for about 8 years now. Before that, I was in Florida all the whole time before that. And so, yeah, when I started, it was that way. First name, there was just one big class everybody went to, and it ran 2 hours. There wasn't any bowing. There wasn't even lining up to start class. So I know that was a big draw for a lot of people, was to get away from the traditional martial arts, which I never did. I did maybe one intro class to Taekwondo when the guy came into my school and made us all do horse stance. But I didn't come from that background. So I had always had that experience of you just show up, you get ready. My instructor was at least insistent that you start on time, you don't be late, you don't skip warm-ups. Yeah. But otherwise, no bowing, no lining up, no waiting to be asked to come on the mats, having to bow to the photo of whoever, Haley or Gracie or Carlos Sr. or somebody like that. But then I did see that come up. It started becoming a thing. My gym was Gracie Baja, or the gym I trained at. So I was there through when Gracie Baja began to corporatize, and they wanted to be able to have a standard product. They wanted to know that if you went to any Gracie Baja, you would get the same kind of experience, which has some good intentions. It's like a quality control thing. Mm-hmm. So but with that came, we want the bowing, we want the lining up, we want the Professor Kirtley instead of just Matt or Coach or whatever. Like, actually, no one calls me Matt. My actual nickname was Magrão, which just means my instructor forgot my name and called me tall and skinny in Portuguese. But so there has been that shift towards more the traditional martial arts, and I've been trying to figure out, is that just it's easier to sell? Like, is it coming from the economy of it? Is it easier to get a bunch of kids in the kids class if you're not running a little hovel with a bunch of guys beating each other up all day? And if you can have that that marketing of, look, we have the clean spaces, and with that we have the discipline and the order and the
I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. You can have clean spaces and informal class structure. I agree that the meticulous cleaning often goes together with the professor worship and the bowing to photos of dead people, but it's not necessarily conjoined. Though you can separate those two. I've seen it done.
Yeah, so the gym I'm at in Pennsylvania is under Hobson. It's an RMNU gym. And so that doesn't have that level of strictness. The place is still clean. The classes still start on time, but we're not bowing to photos. The one thing I have seen kind of take over most places is there being like an official start to class, like a lineup and a bow or a lineup and a clap or something, which I don't mind. It's not a huge ritual. And I do think there's some value in that, of having people recognize, like, now it's time to focus. Instead of the drifting on and off of the mat, and the guy who stays sitting in the corner and talking, the two higher belts who don't really feel like drilling get to go and mess around while they wait, where instead everyone really focuses and acknowledges, like, we're all going to pay attention now, we're going to stop talking, which hopefully people would just do that. You wouldn't need to force them to do that, but they don't always. So that's the one thing I don't think is too bad.
Yeah. Now, I know you've done a lot of research on cults in the last year. Is that obviously with 2020? Was that the impetus for that, or is that something of?
It really goes back a long time. It goes back to probably around when I was a white belt, because the site that I was really involved in at the time was Bullshido. And so I was looking into all the yellow bamboos.
Oh yes, that's amazing. For the people who don't know what yellow bamboo is, please tell them.
Yellow bamboo is incredible. It was a martial art where it was you were taught energy attacks. So you would charge up your powers, and then you would launch them at people and knock them out. And I think it was a racket run by, I don't know who was in charge of it, but you would go out to these training camps in somewhere out in the islands in the Pacific, and you would probably be learning.
Wasn't it? I thought
maybe. I was trying to remember, because the footage you usually see is of them on the beach, where they have the people charging up their powers, and then there's a whole bunch of probably Indonesian people running at them, and then they would release their energy beams, and then all the Indonesian guys would just fall on the ground shaking. So just what a great racket that is, of just, you get to pay all these guys to come out and convince these tourists that they're learning, telepathic energy weapons.
The dark side of force projection.
That one's pretty funny. Too bad these people are getting ripped off believing in these things, because you might remember that old video of the MMA fighter and that woman at the beach. There's a video of an MMA fighter and that woman where she's claiming, I can shoot this energy beam at you and stop you. Okay. And he goes, okay, I'm going to go stand here on the beach. You charge up. I'm going to charge you. You stop me. And he just plows straight through her. He smashes her to the ground. And so that's kind of
laughing.
sad.
I'm a bad person, but I'm laughing.
I certainly laughed at the time, but I don't want to see someone get hurt because they were deluded. But so that one is one of them. But the one that really caught my interest was Chung Mudo, which,
Okay, you got me
do you know
there.
anything about?
No, I don't.
Chung Mudo had a few names. The guy who led it was a Korean guy named Iron Kim.
Okay.
And that one is a
Oh,
full-on
hang on. Is that the
cult.
guy who sort of you could be mistaken if you thought that this guy was the Korean Bruce Lee? He kind of dresses, or is this the big fat Korean guy?
He wasn't big and fat. He had like a big pompadour. He was he was teaching probably some form of taekwondo, but he called it an amalgamation of a bunch of different arts. And on the surface, it just looked like any crappy McDojo. It was people going in and learning forms and doing push-ups and bowing to photos. But where it got extreme was that it had elements of like brainwashing in the sense of the type of things that were done in North Korea and communist China, of indoctrination, of getting people to isolated from their families and getting them to join the martial arts commune, give up all their possessions.
Really?
And when you follow the whole story,
Full
there
on Jim
are
Jones. Full on
yeah,
sell
because
everything, join us, and we'll take care of you.
yeah, there's a great podcast by a survivor of this group, and I say survivor because his story's horrific. It's called "Deceived the Mu Years," like Chung Mudo, the Mu Years, because he was punished and made to do push-ups for some number of hours, and he got his arms got so inflamed he got rhabdo, and he had to get his surgery on his arms because he almost destroyed all the muscles in his arms. So this is the level of conditioning and devotion they were made to have. And when people, and also the guy running it, Iron Kim, was supposed to have superpowers. He had a whole mythology. So they would get in these states of exhaustion after all these really extreme calisthenics that they class consisted of, because they weren't really fighting, because it was basically just taekwondo with a bunch of working out. But then they would be made to do things like lay there in their exhaustion and then hear these stories about the wonders of Master Kim, and how he can, high kick off of a 10-story building and land on the ground safe, or how he can, I'm trying to remember all the stupid superpowers he was supposed to have, but they would be put into these states of exhaustion and awe, and they had a real strict hierarchy of belts, and those would be used to indoctrinate them until they would give up their lives, quit their jobs, stop talking to their family who were trying to take them out of the group. And there's even potentially some murders connected to this group. If you so listen to that podcast if you want to know the whole story. But that caught my interest because I was like, how could this, what's basically a super, or like a mini market next door martial arts dojo, take people to this extreme of commitment and behavior?
How do you think they can, like, I'm sure there's lots of McDojo senseis who would love to have that kind of power and love to have that kind of dominion over people, and especially their female acolytes, because now they could, finally have that harem they think they've always deserved.
Yeah.
But they don't succeed. So was this Iron Kim guy just super charismatic, or did he have some previous experience in Scientology or something? There I go, losing all my Scientology listeners. Were they the very structure of the school was set up to create that kind of cult-like thinking?
What I've been trying to figure out, and this isn't clear to me, was is he had a certain experience from his time in Korea, because there was a model for this type of thought reform that was used in China and North Korea. And there's another group that's a religious group called the Unification Church, or they're also known as the Moonies, which also has a Korean leader. And that one is much bigger and that's a whole nother huge topic. But they seem to share the same understanding of how to do social control, how to isolate someone from the people they know and surround them with people who are going to enforce a certain message. There's usually an element of manipulation. There's a thing called mystical manipulation, which is where you give someone like a really profound experience that you could even attribute to like a magical cause. And this could happen to people who are, say, being led through a meditation, but they don't know they are, and they've never meditated before. So they're given some sort of mind altering, mind expanding experience. And then they're going, wow, what was that? And you go, well, Mr. Kim has perfected these techniques of mind enhancing, longevity building martial arts. And you go, wow, this feels amazing. I got to do more of this. And so that leads them in, and they've been given this experience that really is profound to them, but they just don't know what really caused it. And so they're going to want more of that feeling. And so it's not like you walk in and day one, they go, yeah, sign here, give up all your possessions, leave your family, live in a commune, worship this guy. I think Kim eventually went to jail for tax fraud, of course, something silly like that. But it's just, you come in and you do a martial arts class, and here's the other thing, you're in a situation you don't really know the norms for yet. Yeah. You don't know the hierarchy of people, but you know everyone's above you. You assume there's some special wisdom to it if you're romanticizing like Eastern mysticism being incorporated into it. And so you're looking around for, how am I supposed to behave here? And everyone's bowing in a certain way to certain people, and you're going to be under these pressures. And I wouldn't say it would just work on everybody, but you start coming to these classes, and I've seen that happen with just any McDojo without some big nefarious cult leader at the top of it, where you just, how do you get people to train karate for their whole life and then never know how to fight, but they believe they do? Because they're being drawn into a thing where it's really more about the socializing with people, the engaging in this shared fantasy of, we're doing Taekwondo as taught to, the old warriors why do you do high kicks like this? Oh, so you can kick guys off of horses, of course. That was what
defeat
they
the Mongol horsemen, of course.
That's why Taekwondo has high kicks. You got to jump through the air and kick the Mongols off their horses. So those are just kind of silly things you might come to believe, but they are leading you into a world of fantasy. And so if you had some actual understanding of how to create a system that takes it even further, of forcing people into us versus them, making people believe that they're gaining a special acceptance to a special group of elites and the rest of the world doesn't understand. And you just do that over time. You incorporate things where people are, well, here's another wild one I learned about. There's a group called Ramtha School of Enlightenment.
Yes.
JZ Knight.
JZ Knight. I just went down this rabbit hole. That's astounding.
So she's still around. You want to tell people what it is? It sounds like you.
Oh, well, there was. It turns out we're very, very, very fortunate because this woman, JZ Knight, for the last 50 years or so, has been channeling a 35,000-year-old spirit called Ramtha, who's not from Atlantis, although he did fight with the citizens of Atlantis. And when she goes through this long induction process, you have to go watch JZ Knight, Merv Griffin. So this is in the 1970s, I think. Have you seen that video?
No, I haven't.
She goes through this long induction process and like breathing. And this is obviously in an era where people's attention span was longer, because now she'd have to do like a 15-second induction. I bet she does a much shorter induction now. And then all of a sudden she wakes up and she says, what's the first thing that a 35,000-year-old wise Yoda-like character, kind of a cross between Yoda and Mr. Magoo, is going to say? He's going to say, "Indeed." And then all of the acolytes in the audience respond with "Indeed." So it's this tribal recognition thing. And then like basically makes a funny face and talks kind of like a Transylvanian woman combined with, again, like it's madness and just babbling about like metaphysical nonsense that's not provable or disprovable. I mean, I was watching, I was going, okay, so we've got this incredibly wise, incredibly knowledgeable 35,000-year-old creature that can skim off all the metaphysical bits of quantum physics. okay, I understand. How about proving that you're real by giving the physicists who are actually working on, I don't know, dark matter or the grand unified theory of everything or two-dimensional particles or whatever the hell, the next piece of information that they need. By the way, I'm just speaking out to the physicists in the audience. You guys should really try the XYZ mathematical process, and you guys will solve the problem of the missing neutrino or whatever the hell it is. That would be very impressive, but somehow these ancient channeled beings are just there with remarkably modern New Age sentiments and are more than happy to harvest very modern dollars from you to go and be taught the secrets. Apparently, in our compound,
money's just energy, so they're just growing energy.
Yeah, by teaching things like blind archery, or apparently you go down to her compound in Washington State, and it's like everyone goes into a field and they close your eyes and you run around using energy to avoid running into people. But shockingly, people do run into each other and end up in the hospital. It's okay. Sorry, that was a digression.
So sidetracked, because that's just too wild to not talk about. The reason I brought her up was there's a story I heard. It's on another podcast called Indoctrination by Rachel Bernstein, where she talks to people, either ex-cult members or experts in the field. And there were people who ended up in Jay-Z Knight's group by way of a self-defense class.
Really?
And so the self-defense class didn't really consist of martial arts from the way it was described. It was, they would do these extreme isometrics where they would go to the point of pretty much passing out. And so that would put them in this state of exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And then they would be made to sit across from each other and just stare eye to eye, unmoving silently for a while, which is a very, very common hypnosis induction technique. Because when you do that fixed staring, it can do all sorts of strange things to your perceptions. And then while they're in this kind of exhausted, blissed out state, the instructor just kind of walks around sharing his pearls of wisdom. But their instructor was one of these Jay-Z Knight gurus. He was like some lower level leader in her organization. And so what they believe is going to be a self-defense class is this way in which this guy is building up his followers, and he starts slipping in the little things about the metaphysics and the he'd go away to a seminar, come back and let slip a little bit of the secret information he learned about the alien beings or whatever. And so you take these people, you give them something they think is good for them, like self-defense and a workout. It's used to put them in a state where they're highly suggestible, and then they have an authority figure going around and slipping in a lot of things they probably wouldn't believe if they were presented it up front. Mm-hmm. And so there's a story of a guy and his daughter who are doing these classes, and they both get taken up into this Jay-Z Knight organization by way of a self-defense class.
Yeah, so channeling a 35,000-year-old Lemurian spirit, I mean, that's just insane when you think about it. I mean, good thing nothing like that could happen in jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah, good thing. So little known fact is Carlos Gracie Sr. was a spirit channeler. He was deeply into the occult, and he actually made friends with this rich Brazilian banker who was too. And it just turned out that a medium believed that Carlos was a supremely powerful spirit medium. And this banker came to use Carlos as his spiritual guide for decades. Have you ever read this story?
I knew that he was into like mysticism and occult and stuff like that. I mean, how else are you going to convince 8 different women or however many it was to have children with you, including like multiple pairs of sisters?
Yeah, that was a part of his occult beliefs. He was into Theosophy and a few other systems that had made their way into Brazil. I mean, Theosophy is a whole huge topic.
No, my mother is a Theosophy / anthroposophy, was a survivor of that while she was alive. And just, if you mentioned anything to do with Eastern European mysticism, she would just go nuts and start basically cursing the name of Blavatsky, which was the woman who started Theosophy. But I didn't realize that Carlos was connected to that. Tell me more.
So he had always had if you read it in his, one of his youngest daughters wrote a biography of him. I haven't read it because it's in Portuguese or only recently got translated, but there's a website where someone summarizes it. And in it, you find out that he had always had vivid dreams and weird nightmares, and he was a very eccentric person. And this then became proof that he had a spiritual connection. And in Theosophy and similar beliefs, there's this idea that there are these ancient spirits and these ascended masters. And so they came to believe that all these things Carlos experienced were actually his connection to the spirit world. And so this banker who had shared these beliefs wanted Carlos around because he felt like the banker believed he had one of these spirits with him, but he couldn't channel it. But Carlos could. And so real conveniently, this spirit would channel, Carlos would say, hey, you should help bankroll Carlos's tournament he needs to run. Hey, you should let Carlos sleep with your fiance because they share a spiritual connection.
That was addressed in the Choque series of books. At one point, Carlos managed to knock up one of his patron's wives.
Yeah, with approval, because part of Carlos's belief system was that the greatest act of creation was to make life, which explains when you look at the family tree why it's like a mile wide. And so I think that might even had something to do with, if you have ever listened to the Helio Gracie interviews or read the Playboy interviews, where he's talking about how, I mean, this is all kind of Catholic beliefs, how he doesn't use any birth control, but it was this idea that you shouldn't withhold your life force. It was not just that he wanted to have a bunch of sex. It was that they thought through that they were creating the biggest spiritual creation you could have, which was to create a new life. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't even know about from that time, because they were into all this spiritualism. And eventually it came back to bite him, because this guy who Carlos had been a spiritual guru for a long time eventually sued him for larceny. And they had a breaking up then, but there were decades where this guy would, ask Carlos to tell him what the spirit looked like, and it was what color it was and how old it was. And they came up with a name for it, kind of like in a Ouija board sort of way, where Carlos would look at the letters of the alphabet, and if one vibrated to him, that was the next letter in the name. So the name is, let me look it up. Egidio Lasjovino.
Well, that rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? So that's actually the true founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a Peruvian spirit named Egidio Lasjovino. So we have a precedent for all the flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and QAnon people in Jiu-Jitsu.
I'd love to be able to draw a direct line of causality there, but really when your family is that large, I mean, you can't even control what your kids end up doing or what your wife does or what your uncle or nephew does. How are you going to if by the time you're in the hundreds, there's going to be wacky beliefs spread through it up and down? Or do you see specific signs of theosophy in the current belief structure of people like, I don't know, I'm guessing Gracie would be the most vocal flat earther, alternate science guy in the Gracie family right now.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any real direct signs of it. There's a loose parallel you could draw, which is that Theosophy has this belief in gaining knowledge from a secret master and going up through special ranks to gain esoteric secret knowledge. So you could loosely parallel that to the origin myth of Jiu-Jitsu. They get this Eastern source of wisdom from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu masters, and then they take it and then they reinterpret it to the world, but you have to come to the true source to gain it. So I don't know that that's a real true direct, if they had that in their mind when they did that. But I was thinking about that today, that there's a loose parallel there of these secret masters who you take the knowledge from and then teach the rest of the world.
The secret master motif is so embedded in every mythology all over the world. It'd be, just because it exists in two different places doesn't necessarily mean it's connected, unless you want to start connecting.
It's more like the hero's myth. It's a common thing you're going to hear in any story where you want to add a little spice to the origin.
Yeah. No, I've really got to learn more about Theosophy and its offspring, Anthroposophy, because that stuff resonates everywhere still in society. I mean, like Waldorf schools were heavily influenced
Yep.
by Rudolf Steiner, and he's, Anthroposophy, and that split off from Theosophy. And, I mean, now we're
There's
totally getting
QAnon
off.
connections now too.
There's
There's
what?
Theosophy. There's Theosophy. Like it's turned into so many groups. So there are Theosophy groups that are deep into QAnon now, and because QAnon started taking on that somewhat spiritual aspect to it, where when the Q drops would just be these sort of new agey, we're fighting like that idea of like the many dimensional war against dark workers and all that. That's in QAnon now. And so there are Theosophy groups who see that there's an idea where they have that there needs to be this religious awakening in America that they are going to be a part of. So there's this blending of those two even.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, how many places have theosophical beliefs gone, and how many things has that?
Everywhere. When you look into it, like every
never
modern
use
cult,
that phrase ever again in my presence. Look into it. It's a verboten phrase of 2021. But wait, when you look into
I was
Theosophy,
actually listening to somebody who was also a survivor of some Theosophy groups, and he said him and another person sat down and just started listing how many groups can we think of that sprung off of this, and they stopped when it hit the hundreds. There are so many little splinter groups. There's another podcast called if you give me a second, I'll remember it. But it's by a girl who grew up in a theosophical splinter group, and now she interviews people from other cults who were born in them. And that group was not even that big. It was like a small one in California, but there's all these little ones all over the place. And they believe a lot of those end up believing in channeling and channeled spirits. I've been getting really into multi-level marketing, not myself, but researching how awful it is. And there's actually a crossover there. A lot of the motivational speakers who talk about the secret or the law of attraction are channelers. So if you look up where the law of attraction, the magical thinking comes from, it's existed in some form for a long time because it's just the idea that your thoughts create the universe. But the one that got marketed as the secret comes from a woman who is a Christian spirit channeler who channels like Abraham, but Abraham not of the Bible. Abraham's like an amalgamated spirit of all these ancient wisdoms. So you get these people going around saying, if you listen to my wisdom that I channel, you can go sell your Amway or your, I think it's Amway they're connected to. You can go sell your soaps and toilet paper.
Well, I'll go back to the physics. If they have got some ancient suggestion, because of course they built the pyramids and they probably could travel faster than light. If they've got some concrete mathematical suggestions for how we can break the light barrier in travel, or teleport to another planet, or solve the problem of dark matter or dark energy mathematically, then you might be able to turn an entire generation of physicists into Amway salesmen, and that would be quite something.
There you go. Yeah, so it's funny how the best they can usually come up with would be something that I could get off the Deepak Chopra quote generator that just randomly combines his phrases.
Is there a Deepak Chopra quote generator?
Yeah. You get as much wisdom as you can eat.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to sit here and kind of make fun of the whole thing. And I think making fun of it does provide some level of inoculation to people maybe listening to this. But if I'm totally honest about it, if I'd been 15 or 16 years old, back when I was in my Shaolin Kung Fu days, where they worked you very hard physically, and there was a very strict hierarchy, and they would only we didn't really train self-defense, but once in a while you'd get given a little pearl of wisdom. Ah, yes, the true application of this hand movement is a grip break, or whatever. And it was clear that, or what was the picture that was being painted for us is we were just getting a little bit of the grand secret vision. We're just getting a little piece of the truth. The truth is there, but you have to work for it. and you're not quite ready, you haven't yet proven your dedication, it takes X number of decades to become a master, and one day, the implication was, the head Sifu would then show you everything. If there'd been a way to short circuit that and be shown the true secrets, kind of following the mythology of all the kung fu movies, where the young grasshopper finds his Pai Mei instructor, finds the the master of 5 animal kung fu or whatever the hell, I probably would have gone for it. As a middle-aged, as a mid-teenager, I think with the right sales pitch, I would have totally been vulnerable. I'd like to think I wouldn't be so vulnerable now. I'd like to think that I've learned to identify those patterns. And, the whole, if something's too good to be true, it probably is. But, I just want to be clear to people that I'm not saying I'm magically immune. I think there definitely would have been a time when I would have... I was there reading all those kung fu books at the bookstore, talking about how to develop Iron Fist or Iron Belt Qigong, or how to learn to leap over buildings. I was there reading it. I was kind of doubting it, but at the other hand, I was keeping an open mind. This whole both sides-isms, this is completely ridiculous, but here's a book saying it can happen. Clearly, the both sides position is that it might be possible. It really isn't, because if you really could learn to jump over a house, then you could enter the Olympics and just walk up, forget the Fosbury flop, forget the running approach to the high bar. You could just jump over there with your kung fu technique, and Olympic medals and millions of dollars of sponsorship would be yours. And the fact that nobody's doing that should be an indicator that it's complete horseshit.
Yeah, it's very easy to look at that stuff and laugh, but I'm just lucky jiu-jitsu was popular when I got into martial arts. Because when I started looking up doing martial arts, I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu. I was ready to do karate or any jeet kune do or anything. Not to say there's anything wrong with those, but I just didn't know. I was just willing. I walked into a karate school and I walked into a kung fu school. But when I asked online, because I'd started watching MMA back when you had go buy DVDs at Best Buy. I said, what are these guys doing? Who are these Gracies? And everyone said, just go do jiu-jitsu. Don't look at this other stuff. Just go do jiu-jitsu. And so, I had all this super infatuation on that. There's definitely a young male infatuation where you get into something. And I was I was on Bushido, so I was just arguing with karate guys all day. And I was just lucky enough I didn't go into a karate school first and sign up, or otherwise I'd been on the other side arguing why I was right. But the thing you said there about if you being a teenager, that's a real vulnerable time for this kind of stuff, because that's when you start becoming able to get really infatuated with things. And I'm just going to keep
teenage
name dropping people.
Right?
Exactly. That's when you have your first big teenage crush, and you just can't. Your emotions are so high. So that'd be the best time to sell somebody, grab teenage boys, and you could sell them on all kinds of crazy things if it appealed to their desires. And there's a guy whose work's been really interesting to me. His name's Yuval Leor, if I said that right. And he studies awe and fervor, meaning how do people come to have these experiences where they feel at awe? And it's usually in the context of a religious conversion, but it could be for any kind of conversion into a new belief or a group. And the fervor being, how does a group maintain that level of excitement? And so he has some interesting work where he talks about how, you take young guys, in particular teenagers, adolescents, they're just now developing that ability to become really infatuated and fall in love with people, but also with ideas and things. And you stick them in a Chung Mudo class where they see this guy who's supposed to have it all figured out, and he's telling them superpowers are real if you really dedicate yourself, and they're gaining friends and they're gaining a new way of believing. And then from the outside and from older, when you're older, you can look at them and laugh at them. But if you're in their situation, who's to say you wouldn't do the same thing? There's that tendency to think that, that basic principle of psychology, just slipped my mind once I wanted to think of it. But the idea that when something bad happens to somebody else, it's probably their fault. But when something bad happens to you, you can explain all the ways in which this fate was unfair to you or the circumstances were. So we tend to over attribute faults to people when they're in those situations, but we don't. Whereas we would give ourselves a much bigger benefit of the doubt if we believed in it.
So I want to bring the conversation back to jiu-jitsu, but before we do that, we've all seen, or many of us have seen, thanks to videos on the internet, stuff that guys like McDojo Life are sharing, videos of yellow bamboo-like stuff, where somebody comes flying at somebody, and then I make my magic hand signal, or I take the ball of energy and I bounce it off a wall and hit the guy in the head with it, and the guy goes flopping to the ground like he's been shot with a 12 gauge. Or somebody grabs my wrist and I make a tiny little movement and the guy does a flip 10 feet in the air. Or a crowd of people all fall down the second I project energy. So those people who are falling down, what's going through their mind? Do they actually believe they've been hit by an energy blast? Or is it just such strong peer pressure and not wanting to lose all their peers that they're faking it? Or are they putting themselves into a state of mind where they believe it's happening? What are your thoughts on why people are playing along? I could understand why I would believe that I have magic powers if every time I make a force projection movement, somebody falls to the ground. Given enough time, I might start thinking that I'm the shit and that this is real. But I don't understand why the people playing along play along.
I mean, I've been trying to figure that out for 20 years, and I think it's going to be a mixture of all those things, which is the cop-out answer. I would want to see more of what the day-to-day is like in those places where they train all these guys who are willing to flop over. If it's a lot of sort of strange, almost like it's a funny word to use, but like hypnotic conditioning. Are they led through a series of, are they first hit physically and saying, oh, you got to condition yourself this way, and then we'll work up to psychic powers? The only anecdote I have on this is, you ever seen those Systema videos where the guy will, someone walks up to punch him or stab him and he just goes like, turns his shoulders and the people go flying off of him?
The big fat Russian guy.
Yeah, or he'll go and he'll just like,
or he'll have somebody a knife on his belly and he's like moving the knife around with his belly.
Yeah.
Or he was lying on there was a great video of him lying on his back, and then somebody's got his hand on his chest and then goes flying off. And then he goes over and puts his hand on the knee as the Russian guy's lying on his back, and then goes flying off. It would really revolutionize escaping from the bottom in jiu-jitsu if we could just master that. Yeah. So the only anecdote I've heard of somebody who's actually been to that was Steve Maxwell. Okay.
I talked to Steve Maxwell once, and he said he says what you don't see is before he does the no touch, light touch crippling of people where they collapse to the ground without being touched, is he will do a actual punch. He'll do like those like Bruce Lee 1-inch punches. And Steve said he had it done because he didn't believe in it. Steve Maxwell, old school jiu-jitsu. I love the guy. He said he went to him and the guy hit Steve so hard, so painfully, he'd never felt anything like it. So then later on, when you're in that situation where they go, okay, run up to the guy and try to hit him again, and he does that little hand gesture and you fall, kind of despite yourself, you almost are like hypnotized into that fear of being hit again. I don't know. Okay. I never had that experience, but that's the story he told me. He says, I would have thought it was total BS. It's not going to work like that in a fight where someone he's never met, he can do that to, and then they fall over. But I think that, because I've known a few other people who you wouldn't think would fall for this stuff, jiu-jitsu black belts. And I think I know a guy who's like in the special ops who got into this kind of low touch, no touch system of stuff. So they're having some kind of experience when they're there that makes them really impressed. But I would really think there's something going on that's deceptive about it. They're being kind of led through a sort of
a yes ladder.
Yeah, like they're being given these conditioning experiences so that by the time they're to that level of the no touch knockout, there's been a lot of things earlier that made them in a state of mind or prone to, like earlier I said, the
Yeah.
idea of mystical manipulation.
And
You give someone
maybe not
they
even
can't explain.
pain, but just if you don't flinch at the right time in class, you get shunned a little bit. And if that's where
Yeah,
all your entire social network is. So what you're saying is be a little bit like us taking a look at a video of me lifting a stick and a dog cowering. And look, Stephan is claiming magic powers because every time he lifts a stick, the dog like goes down on the ground and but what we didn't see before is me taking that stick and beating the dog with it. So now there's
yeah.
conditioning where me lifting the stick means you're going to get it. You better behave, subserviently. And then that's possibly what we're seeing in some of these cases.
That's what I'm wondering. I've never seen enough of how their day-to-day
Mm.
training goes and all the earlier things leading up to it to know. But I don't believe they're doing mystical energy powers. But there's people who I would believe who say they went and it was different than they thought. So I don't know that it has any real martial application. It's almost more like an interesting uh, animal magnetism hypnosis sort of trick,
Mm.
similar to the way people can be hypnotized to think they can't pick their hands up off of tables, or to be made to lay down on the floor without realizing it. There's these tricks of hypnosis. I feel like it's just a martial arts flavored version of that,
Mm.
where you're doing some trick of how a person's perception is being changed. I think the social aspect of it can be really important too. Like you said, there's like a bit of a pressure to, if everyone around you seems like they're getting it,
Mm.
will you get it too? There was an old experiment they did where they would have people come in and there'd be one real person who doesn't know they're in the experiment and everyone else is an actor. And they would be shown a series of lines. And the test was just which line is longer. And there was usually a very clear line that was longest. And the actors would start by saying the correct answer the first few rounds, and then they would all start saying the wrong answer. And then it would be up to this one person who doesn't know they're in a test of this type to defy the rest of the group and say, no, you're all wrong. That's the correct answer. And what they found when they first ran this was the people would doubt their own perceptions and go with what everyone else was saying because they would feel like they couldn't run against that many other people saying it.
Mm.
So if you have
Yeah.
a room full of people who have already been conditioned to believe in this no touch knockouts, and you're kind of not sure, but everyone else keeps telling you it's real and everyone else keeps feeling it, and the days when you doubt it, they tell you, oh, I used to feel that way too, but you got to meditate a little more and you got to think on it, and there'll be some special reasoning probably for
Well,
why.
welcome to QAnon.
Yeah, that's
there's a theory in psychology that I've read about a bit. It's called mimetic desire, and the idea is how do we know what we want, right? When I take a look at sort of ideal female body types, right? It used to be that big giant boobs and a small little butt were ideal, and obviously in the last 10, 20 years, that's completely, well, certainly the ideal female shape has completely changed. But the same thing applies to why do we like this song and not that song on Spotify? Why do we all want a red Lambo and why don't we want that gray Toyota Corolla? How do we decide what's valuable? And the theory is that we decide what's valuable based on when we look around what other people think is valuable. So if one idea gets some traction, and like, I don't know what I find attractive in a woman, or I don't know what kind of car I want to get, or I don't know what music I should listen to. I look around, consciously or unconsciously, and then if all these other people are really excited about going to this one concert, then I decide that that's valuable for myself. If everyone going, oh man, I don't want to see those idiots, then I'm much, much less likely to want to go. So we're mimicking. There's a mimetic component to how we decide what we want and what we value. So that it
and
kind of speaks to
I
this thing of like, I don't know how I should respond to this no touch knockout that's happening in front of me, but I guess everyone else is kind of believing in this, wanting this. I guess I'm in.
Yeah, And so I'm also betting they have a huge turnover of people who come in and it doesn't work on them and they walk out. But then you just are left with the people who are highly suggestible or highly imaginative who are going to go with it, who kind of want it to be true.
Yeah. I mean, don't hypnotists, before they do a hypnotism show, do a quick little screen of the audience to see who's suggestible and who's not? And they don't waste any time on the people who are not suggestible. Like, why would I spend?
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's usually a correlation, I think, with hypnotists will say there's usually people who you can just tell are going to be more easily hypnotizable. They tend to be real imaginative because that ability to have the to imagine things that aren't real is really what a hypnotist wants, is they need somebody who's willing to entertain things as though they were real.
So I used to think that jiu-jitsu by nature was a more scientific martial art, was a more scientific approach to martial arts, and would select from more sort of rational and scientifically oriented people than other martial arts because it was so empirically testable. I think 2020 proved me wrong on that. And I used to think that jiu-jitsu would avoid cult worship or this cultish behavior more so than other martial arts because it was so, again, so easily testable, so demonstrable, and so informal. And I think it might be a little bit more, but we've all seen crazy examples of cultish behavior in jiu-jitsu.
That's been my experience. The main difference is just jiu-jitsu isn't going to use its cultishness to convince you of supernatural powers, but it might use it to convince you to really have a cult of personality around your instructor, which is what I've seen more so is the dominating instructor who really starts telling students how they should live their life outside of jiu-jitsu. That's the cultist aspect of it that I've seen. And it's not going to be the same way, like I said earlier, of like joining a commune and leaving your family. It's going to be that you're falling in line with that guy senior to me because of his belt rank or because he's been here longer or because he beats me up on the mats. So when he does something unacceptable, if he's using his position to try to sleep with students, or if he's using his position to kind of get a lot of hero worship, we're not going to push back on that because there is a different sort of cultishness to it. If we use if we say cultishness to mean that there are ways in which there's a power imbalance and someone's able to exert too much influence and control over people where they really shouldn't. And so with jiu-jitsu, there was that tendency to think that, wow, that guy's a black belt. I wonder what else what else are their opinions? So they'd start talking about diet and lifestyle and women. And so that's where I've seen jiu-jitsu instructors, because they can be so revered by their students and they can also be so physically dominant over their students, is that there's an inherent bias by most students to trust the instructor beyond what you would trust other people. I know you've talked about that too, where you wouldn't, go to your doctor and ask them to work on your car.
No.
But in jiu-jitsu, we assume if they're a black belt, then I also want to know what they think about life and how to live and how to have a passion. Yeah. We're going to expand out that the idea that they're good at one thing means they probably know a lot about other things.
Whereas, in fact, the opposite might be true, because they might have spent so much time honing their armbar and choking skills that they won't actually have, oh God, I'm using the phrase, had time to do the research, by which I mean going and actually getting an education in the things that they're purporting to know. I mean, when I think of the bad medical advice I've received in my life, the worst medical advice delivered with the most certainty has definitely come from martial artists. And in retrospect, like, it would have been crippling, or it would have even been lethal. Like, remember when I was dying of kidney failure because of a polycystic kidney disease, which is a genetically inherited thing. The advice that I was getting, to be fair, that was a Taekwondo guy who also did jiu-jitsu, but like to quit all, seeing those allopathic doctors and just, I think it was a crystal and meditation based program. I'd be dead, right? I could call that pretty bad advice. And certainly when I look at orthopedic advice, oh man, you've got your shoulder strained. Well, just take this. Has also been pretty terrible. And you'd think actually that by the time you get to black belt in jiu-jitsu, you will have had a lot of experience with injuries and you'd actually be good at the whole rehab game. But it ain't necessarily so.
My experience is the exact opposite. Black belts are just walking injury piles. The thing I got into in recent years is was trying to undo all the injuries I've had, because I was just told, stretch, maybe do some weightlifting, whatever, just do more jiu-jitsu. And the injuries were just kind of a cost. Injuries were just sort of a cost that you were supposed to pay in order to do it. And I think that's unavoidable for any sort of contact sport, especially a combat sport, that you're going to just get a lot of wear and tear. But no, the amount of bad advice I've gotten from black belts. Just recently, I was talking to a black belt who had convinced another guy, and these are, outside of being black belts, they are both doctors. They had totally bought into moon landing is fake.
Hang on. These are medical doctors, like MD?
Yeah. One is like a neurointerventionalist who fixes people's strokes. And the one told the other, you got to watch this documentary. And they came the next day and they were telling me all about how the moon landing was fake because they saw this documentary that really. So it goes to show, jiu-jitsu, doctors, anybody, once you take somebody out of the field they know, they can falsely carry with them that sense of certainty and apply it to a thing they don't really know about.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about was actually a set of red flags that you and I could come up with to, let you know you're in a jiu-jitsu cult. But I think we just mentioned, or you just mentioned the first thing, which is that sense of certainty. I think if somebody comes to you and says, this is the way it is, right? When you are in mount, this is the 3-step thing you should do. That's very reassuring, as opposed to, well, it depends. How's the guy holding his arms? How's the guy positioning his body? How big is this guy's neck? Are his arms like 12 inches long? It depends. It depends is not reassuring. What should we do about COVID? This COVID is a hoax. It has been created for world domination, and here's exactly what we should do. That's very reassuring. Whereas, we're learning more things every day. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge being accumulated, but it means that some of our old knowledge is going to be modified. That's not at all reassuring. I think the certainty is very, very seductive in an uncertain world.
Yes. And it certainly is. So I know, with jiu-jitsu as the example, it definitely is so much easier on new students if you just say, this is how you do it. Just do it this way. And it's easier as an instructor, if you're not an experienced instructor, to just say, this is how you do it. And they go, why? And you go, because that's how we've always done it. Or, or you put them on the spot and you say, well, try to do it a different way.
This is the only way that uses leverage.
Yeah. You smash them for trying. And there are certainly schools that build up that way. And it is just less satisfying as a student when the instructor goes, well, you could do it a few different ways, and I like it this way. And it sounds so wishy-washy, even if it's true. So people really crave that certainty. I remember early on when I was first learning to teach, because I started teaching back when I was a blue belt, just covering classes, was that there was a black belt who didn't like teaching. And so when he would come out, he would talk like he was unsure of himself, or he knew everything he was doing, but he just didn't have the presence. So, okay, guys, so maybe you're in this position, and you go here, and you could do this, and the students would all tune out, and kind of, you could tell the class was losing him. And so I learned very early on, if you just have I know what I'm talking about voice, it makes the class run smoother, at least. It makes people feel like better. What should I do here? Instead of saying, well, you say, well, grab that and speak with that authority, and it will make people much more satisfied. Even if the real answer is you could do it a whole bunch of different ways, and why don't you try it out and figure it out yourself? So there's a need, I think, sometimes at the beginning to just give a student one answer because they can't handle.
I
that
don't
level.
disagree. Again, it's a bit of a false dichotomy to say one or the other. You could say, here is what you should do. When you get better, you can do it 10 different ways, and some people do it different ways. But for starting out, grab this, then move your hips this way, then sit up, then do that. I think there's probably a middle path there.
Yeah. The thing I've been really struggling with is trying to apply the principles of sports science, motor learning, and some of the more modern approaches to teaching and learning that run contrary to so many of the traditions of teaching in jiu-jitsu and other sports. And it runs against so many things that I was brought up doing as a student
Are you
and an
talking about
instructor.
dirty drilling here?
Dirty drilling, about not doing lots of static reps or repetitive reps, getting people to do, purposely putting in people into situations where they don't really know what to do yet. So they have a kind of a pre-test of struggle and confusion. And then rather than telling them the answer, you set up a situation in which they will hopefully discover the answer. There are ways that other sports are moving forward with this idea.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so there's a concept called constraint-based coaching, where you choose something that you want to constrain. So an example of this would be having basketball players wear these goggles that don't let them see below a certain point. So they can't see their hands while they're dribbling. They can't see their legs or the floor. They can only see across to other players in the hoop. So you're constraining their vision and forcing them to play in a way that will develop a certain set of skills they wouldn't develop if they had all of their abilities. Because what they find now is if you let the person play like normal, look at their hands, look at the ball, they look at their hands and look at the ball when they could be looking across to see where to pass it to, or looking more strategically around. But when you take away that option, then they find they actually develop better motor skills for using their hand to reach out and find the ball without looking at it. So there's other sports where they're developing approaches that do things like that, or you don't really do any formal instruction or drilling. You just immediately go to games, and the structure of the game only allows you to do certain skills, right or wrong. And
that's really interesting because I've just shot an instructional with Rob Bernacki. So we both self-isolated. We both got tested. We both didn't hang out with anybody else. And we filmed an instructional on grip fighting and the arm drag and the 2-on-1. And it's very heavily gamified, right? Like, in order to get good at the arm drag, we're going to heavily, heavily constrain what you can do and what I can do. And my only goal is to get the arm drag position, not even to finish it. And you have only one or two things that you can do. And by awarding points, you get a massive number of reps under pressure in. I'll send it to you when I'm done. I think you'll really like the approach.
Yeah, Rob's someone I followed too, and I think he would know a lot of this, what I'm talking about. But these are the advances that we're seeing in other fields where they can study. And it's often, I think, simpler to study because, like, you can take baseball and just pick swinging or throwing, or you can take basketball and do shooting, and you can pick a very specific skill and measure it repeatedly. Whereas with jiu-jitsu, it's so many skills and so many different body types, and it's a really messy sport. So it's trying to figure out, how do we take something that was learned over there and then see how to apply it. And so the struggle I have is often those other methods leave students very frustrated and confused. But objectively measuring their skill, they improved more. So if you just don't care that the person enjoyed themselves, you can make them better faster. But if you're running a school where people can just decide they're not going to go today, or they're going to skip that instructor's lessons, or they come into a class and they go, you didn't show me anything yet. Why are you making me fight? And you say, oh, you're going to learn as you go.
So can you give me an example of a dirty drill, of something that you use a lot when you're teaching to work on any aspect of jiu-jitsu?
Similar to what you were talking about, the grip fighting, a drill I would do is, say we were going to learn to do seated guard into X guard, and next guard from there, would be having them start where the top person can move around. So there's still a sense of movement, timing, positioning, but they are told all you're really allowed to do is say, like, push on the person's head and maybe slap at their hands, but you're not passing their guard. And then the person on bottom is said, you're told all you're allowed to do is establish this grip and enter the guard. And once you do, just reset. And then I would run that for, say, 30 seconds and then add another level. So now, okay, the person on top gets to do another thing to mess with you. They can start picking up your feet and trying to flip you on your back. And we might have gone over how to deal with that. So now you're dealing with 2 skills, under movement, and then every, 30 seconds, a minute, however long you want the drill to run, you add another complication that the dummy can throw at the person who's the focus. And then that person now has to do all of the things together. But there's a constant sense of movement. There's not a static start and stop. And they are, you're kind of hiding the reps in all the confusion. But you're really focusing down on a certain set of skills you want. So that would be
the counter argument there would be, yes, Matt, but in that case, people aren't practicing the movement perfectly, and they're going to develop sloppy habits, and they're not going to have, the tips of their index finger and their middle finger are not going to be lined up in the perfect way to grip that tricep or whatever it is. So what's the counter argument there to that sloppy drilling will develop sloppy technique?
That's a tough one to answer for people because it runs so contrary to their experience. Are you familiar with the idea of random versus blocked practice?
No.
So blocked practice is what we're all used to. Here's move 1, drill it 20 times, move 2, 20 times, move 3, 20 times. And then the random practice would be you still do 20 reps of everything, but we're going to shuffle it. We're going to tell you at random, do move 1, 2, 1, 5, blah, 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 mix them up. At the end of that practice, if you had 2 groups, the one group that was doing 20-20-20 will look much better. They will say it made sense. They will say, I felt so good. By the time I got to my last rep, I didn't have to go on to my next step until I understood the previous one. The instructor will believe these guys really got it. The other group is going to go, that was really weird. I never knew it was coming. I'm not sure I really got it. I kept having to go on before I was ready. And if that was where you ended it, you would say, obviously, 20-20-20 is better than shuffled. But when you retest the person again later under game-like conditions, the group that did 20-20-20 reverts to almost like they never practiced. And the group that did the mixed-up one will have gotten a little bit worse, but they're still better than the other group. So if you only measured it off of the one class, the end of night satisfaction rating would be really low for the people who did this more modern mixed up way. But under real world conditions or similar, the group that didn't really like their practice learns more. If learning is measured as ability under realistic situations. So you have to get the person who doesn't believe in this kind of messy practice to not go off of the happiness of the student at the end of the session or seeing the thing that they would view as the perfect rep, and understand what we're really hoping for is how do they look 2 weeks from now? How do they look a month from now under live conditions? And that's the disconnect that's really hard to get because I was always taught, practice makes perfect, but more so perfect practice makes perfect. But really it's perfect practice makes perfect practice because you're practicing to practice. You're getting really good at practicing without getting good at doing it for real. There's a great talk by, I think he's a volleyball coach, where he was interviewed by the guy who runs a website called, I think, Train Ugly. And he was saying how he basically does all gamified stuff. There's no line up and, hit over the net 20 times. He says he saves those for when the school administrators come because they want to see everybody lined up and doing perfect reps. So when the school administrators come, everyone goes and they do the old way where they can show, everyone doing the exact same thing in an orderly way. But once they leave, they're doing all these little mini games. They're running here, they're doing this skill against another player. So both players are practicing a different skill. And then they're running over here and they're doing another skill so that they are doing it like they'll do in a game. You're not going to serve the ball 20 times in a row in the game. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to do it in a mixture of everything else going on.
Okay. And have you found success incorporating these methods into your teaching?
Yeah. So I've been trying to incorporate them more. The thing that I had started doing when I got more into this method of teaching was to talk a lot less during instruction, to just show the move, show it again with just the key points, and then before even any questions really, let everyone go, try it once or twice, maybe a few more times than that if they really need it, but then just set up a very simple game that has you succeed when you do your move. And the partner might start basically as like a clumsy zombie. They're not really going to try to counter the move. But they're not going to be dead, and they're not going to be giving it to you. Like if you do it wrong, they're still supposed to not let it happen, but they're not actively trying to make you fail. And so then bring it back and say, let me explain a few more things. So then I teach it again, get a little more into detail. Now, if there's any questions, the questions will matter because they're not just hypotheticals. They're coming from an experience. Yeah. And then the class can evolve from there, whether you have a series of moves you plan to teach or the students come up with questions and that guides your next round of instruction. But it's been to talk a lot less and then get people into trying it sooner. And sometimes even trying it, and this is the one that's kind of hard for people to get sometimes, trying it before you've given, like setting them up in a game without any instruction. So that they're purposefully confused and frustrated. Because, again, the research finds that sense of frustration will make them really seek out and hold on to the answer much stronger. And if that answer comes from them discovering it through experience, they'll hold on even stronger than if you give it to them.
I think something you see occasionally in jiu-jitsu is that, and other martial arts too, is that instructors who are very, very verbal and very intellectual, they really get off on long, complicated explanations of the nuance of the position of the little finger and the angle that the thumb to the little finger makes, and that you want 75 degrees, not 65 degrees, and here's why, and blah, 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 blah. And it's not necessarily about helping the student. It's about gratifying their own ego. Like, here's how well I understand this. And sometimes it's even about making it so complicated that the instructor is necessary, because you're never going to remember it all. And he's not taught you how to fish. He's giving you a fish and making sure it's a very small fish. And then you got to come back the next day for another fish and another fish and another fish. It really sometimes plays to the instructor's ego and conception of self. Is like, yes, I'm the most analytical black belt, and I have the deepest philosophical understanding of this issue. Not what's best for the student.
I'll say I'm somewhat guilty of that because I'm overly analytical in my jiu-jitsu. I want to understand everything. I want to know every detail. And for a long time, I was praised by students and other instructors for being so detailed, for knowing everything about the move and having a catalog of information in my mind. And so I've had to really fight myself to not be that way. Because it feels great to go up there and show your depth of knowledge in every little detail and be able to answer every question perfectly. And to then instead just say, like, your job is to just set up games and make sure they run correctly, doesn't let you feed your ego in that same way. So I've had to kind of try to divorce myself from that feeling of satisfaction I want to feel, and try to find ways of more accurately just measuring the performance of my students. And you've probably had this experience. It can be pretty hard to get people to give you that feedback. How was class today? Oh, it was good. Anything you want different? Anything you want changed? And they're going, No, that seemed pretty good.
No, they don't know
Because
what
they're
they
not
don't know.
yeah, they're not instructors. It's not really their job to know how to change the class. But the times I have run these classes where I would say, we're going to start in this situation. Here's a basic goal. Don't go too hard. We're not warm yet. Then I'll tell you what I think you should try. And then building the class the way I described. And I had a lot of really great feedback from that because there's no downtime of sitting and watching the instructor for 20 minutes. There's instructors who I love because they do have really great techniques, but they'll teach for 10 minutes without showing a full rep because every moment, every step they get to, they start talking about what ifs and contingencies. And it's all good information, but I actually don't, but I still don't know where we're going with this. So that's why I said I often just show the move, no talking, just make everyone look, show it again, say the 5 key points, let them go practice, turn it into a little game, bring them back, show it again, talk about it now, take a question, send them back to the game, show the next, and then the class builds like this where there isn't a lot of just watch me be such a good instructor. And I can still show off if I want to when people call me over for questions, and I can, if I really want to, say, yeah, exactly, do this next time. But it's really pointing to that not being the way to teach. And sad for me because it feels really good to be treated like you're smart.
Well, I remember taking a hazardous materials course with the fire department, and the guy teaching it was a chemist by training. And he started getting into electron shell orbitals, right?
Okay.
And how many electrons fit in a shell, and I had learned this stuff in university. I understood it. Nobody else in the room understood it. And it really doesn't matter. There is almost no application ever in a fire department hazardous materials context where knowing about whether this is a 2 electron shell or a 8 electron shell matters at all. And it was just 100% ego gratification and not at all about the takeaway experience of the student, other than, oh my God, that guy's so smart. And then I started thinking about this in the jiu-jitsu context, and I started seeing the same thing in the jiu-jitsu context and having to check it in myself. It's always good to know 2 levels higher than what you're teaching, because that with the guy, if the one student, the one super nerd comes to you and goes, hey, you said to grab here. What about grabbing here or here? Then you can go into, well, in wrestling, they tend to grab high under the armpit when they're trying to do this, and they're trying to grab low on the elbow when they're doing this. And here's a list of the jiu-jitsu greats who've grabbed high, and here's a list of the jiu-jitsu greats who've grabbed low. That's great to have that in your back pocket, but it's not what you should lead with.
Yeah, and that's been my experience is you need honestly, people don't remember most of the things that they're shown. So you can go 2 ways with that. You can think, well, I'm just going to show them as much as possible so at least they remember something. Or you can say they're not going to remember it, so let me give them an experience that will last, even if they forget it in explicit versus implicit learning. Explicit learning would be knowing all the specific details, learning the names of things, the exact grips, all the explicit parts of a move, or in another topic, it would be all the, memorizing all the dates, learning all the orbitals, where the implicit learning is the learning through experience. I don't know how I do it, but I do it. Or, and this is a thing they often find that people have different balances of what they need, where beginners want a lot of explicit learning. They want to be told, do it this way for this reason, because they have no experience and no context. But then when you ask a higher belt, how'd you do that move? And they go, honestly, I don't even remember. I don't even remember doing it because it was so automatic. It came from a lot of implicit, all those things we can't really put a finger on: timing, awareness, sensitivity, balance, strategy.
Which you develop through playing games and through rolling and through sparring, ultimately.
Right. And so the trick is often trying to get people from explicit into implicit, because the implicit's really going to be largely what a person uses to do the thing, where explicit only really matters when you're troubleshooting or you're teaching, or if you're really just so sharp and smart you can think of it in the moment in a fight. which some people are.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're really under pressure, that explicit stuff tends to evaporate.
So I was steering this conversation down a road that I just want to jump back to here in the final moments of our conversation. That was kind of red flags for culty type jiu-jitsu schools. The one I brought up was absolute certainty. What would be some others that you would think would be important?
I'm going to pull up a list here. I'm tapping away on my screen. This is the thing I've given a lot of thought to, because there's a lot of dangerous parallels between a martial arts school and what could become a cult. If you look at things like a hierarchy, and there's a natural hierarchy of jiu-jitsu, it's the belt rank. And so you're going to start giving people these extra respect for something in one field, but it will probably feel like it should apply more than it should. And there's an inherent power imbalance between the instructor and the students, which is somewhat necessary. You're in charge of a school. You need to tell people what to do. You need to run the classes. You need to maintain safety. If there's problems in it, you need to be able to step in and resolve them. But then with that becomes, the ability to exert too much undue influence over students. So, telling them who they can and can't talk to. If someone leaves the school, they're dead to us. They're a traitor. And that's unfortunately a very common attitude, I think, for a lot of jiu-jitsu schools. But the more you see of that, the more you should be concerned. Like, I didn't know that was part of jiu-jitsu culture, that you weren't supposed to go to other schools. And so I didn't really believe in it, and I still don't. But I remember having those experiences where someone would leave a school and then everyone would have to say all the bad things about that person now.
Like an excommunication or a renunciation of everything they ever stood for.
Yeah, when they just went to a different gym. Like, we both like doing jiu-jitsu. They liked doing it somewhere else. And so I couldn't bring myself to really get very riled up over that, because honestly, I stayed friends with people who switched to other gyms who were supposed to be excommunicated. Because I just didn't want jiu-jitsu to be an excuse to put divisions between myself and other people who just enjoy doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even doing something that important. We're doing something we love and that can be a big part of our life and important to us. But there's people doing much more important work for the world than doing jiu-jitsu.
What is on your list there, Matt?
Of important things?
No. The list of cult-like indicators.
So let me take a quick peek here. It would be that there's the idea of a secret special knowledge or status that you have to earn your way to, but you have to do it through loyalty to the instructor. And it's not that I'm against loyalty to like your group, loyalty to the people, but a loyalty that doesn't mean allowing abuses. A loyalty that doesn't mean worshiping my instructor beyond just the respect I should give somebody who I, get something valuable from. So if there's a book I've been reading called Intelligent Disobedience, which looks at the idea of followership. We usually think of leaders, cult leaders, politicians, dictators, and what are the problems of the leader? But you have the whole group of people, and most people are followers. They're not the leaders. So if you're not in a position of authority, how do you still have some influence over your group being a healthy, good one? And so in it is the idea that knowing when to not listen, knowing when to not go along with what everyone else is doing. So with the jiu-jitsu school, that's when you see, for me, it's when there's a lot of sexism. I really don't like that. I've written about that. A lot of sexual harassment goes on. Women being treated poorly or treated like, well, it could be like they're being, everyone hits on them or people touch them in weird ways, or they're not taken as seriously. I think that's a huge red flag. That's something I tend to see at any school I don't really like. That doesn't necessarily mean it's culty. That's just a toxic sort of environment to be in. So I've always felt like that's a real quick one you can catch. Are people using a lot of derogatory gendered slurs? Are people really sexist? Or do they look down on, say, women? Or are they, an effeminate man is like a bad thing? That stuff, I think, is a very quick way to see this gym is going to be pretty toxic and macho, which I think goes along with a lot of these other problems of too much respect given to authority, too much respect given to jerks, letting guys say things that are kind of crappy, but letting it go because he's a brown belt or he's a black belt. What are we going to do about it? So that would indicate to me that the whole culture of that gym has a problem. If we want to get into the bizarro end of it, you just have, the secret techniques, you can't train anywhere else. I knew a guy who
you used to even see you shall not watch YouTube videos. Good luck with that one, yeah. Master Sifu Sensei. But, and if you watch other stuff, it's just going to confuse you and distract you from the truth, the light, and the way.
Yeah. That was certainly, I had that when I was coming up through the ranks, was watch out for YouTube. That stuff's all garbage. I mean,
there is a lot of garbage.
There's a lot of garbage. So I can understand Instructor just wanting to have quality control, but it was more I'm the only source of this. I'm the master. Don't go to anyone else. If you go to anyone else, you're a traitor. If you go to anyone else, they're teaching you the wrong thing. They're corrupting you. And so those kind of demands on loyalty that don't benefit the student. If there's going to be a demand of loyalty, it should be mutually beneficial. It shouldn't just be, you'll put up with whatever I do because I'm in charge. If you don't do what I say, I can kick you out. If you don't do what I say, I can whisper in all the ears of the higher belts and you're going to get ostracized. You're going to find out from somebody else that there's been a rumor started about you that no one shut down. Those would be the things where I think jiu-jitsu can get more toxic. I'd say jiu-jitsu can be culty. I haven't really seen any strict cults of jiu-jitsu, like where people are like living in a commune and worshiping a jiu-jitsu instructor. But there's a spectrum, and it
nobody's moved to Guyana in South America yet.
Yeah. I mean, there's some cruise ships, there's some camps, but I haven't seen anything too terrible at those.
Yeah.
So it'd just be watch out for, is there a real high demand on respecting an authority beyond just the natural authority of I run a school and I'm trying to help you learn. But once it becomes, and I'm teaching you how to live, and I want to control who you speak to, and I want you to, eat a certain way, which might have good intentions, but once it starts becoming more and more controlling of your life than what you originally signed up for, then you got to start worrying about it.
Yeah. I think that separation from friends and family and other people who train at other schools is very, very analogous to what cult leaders often do, right? This whole sell everything you own and come and join me. And by the way, don't call your family. They're just going to try and talk you out of this is a really common feature of many of the hardcore cults, like we talked about.
I'm going to correct myself because I can think of one big example, and that was the Lord Irving situation. He was having people give up their lives, leave their families, come live in his fighter house compound. They were dedicating all their labor, all their time. They were calling him master. And so you can look into that situation. He was doing stuff that I think very squarely falls over into the cult realm of telling them they need to be like androids who obey his commands. They need to respond like this when he tells them to do stuff, not just on the mats when he's coaching, but in life. That's the example I would give for jiu-jitsu, where it went really too far. And again, a situation where there was a lot of sexual exploitation and real toxic behavior by a lot of young men.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it once. It means we'll probably see it again.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like, it's not unique to jiu-jitsu. That's just people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important to reassure people who are listening to this and are thinking of, pulling the plug and going to a new school that, or maybe they don't even know that they can go to a new school. Maybe it's like, if I've already trained at Sifu Bob's House of Jiu-Jitsu, then I can never go train anywhere else. But it's not true, right? Other schools are more than happy to take your money. And that's why whenever anybody says, I'm thinking of starting jiu-jitsu, my advice is always the same, which is go and visit as many different schools as you possibly can. Do a drop-in class at as many different schools as you possibly can. And similar to how we talked about experiential learning and learning through actually doing something is superior to just, looking at the cold hard facts. If you go train at a bunch of different places, you'll very, very quickly get a vibe of the place. And if they won't let you watch a class, if they won't let you try a class, I'd say that's somewhere in the orange to red flag zone as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the best advice is if you're a school owner, you say, just come to my, like I wrote a guide to how to find the best school. And if you're the one who runs the school, you want to say, come to mine and stay. But really it's come to mine, go to the other guys, find the right place for you. Like we don't want to like a good instructor won't want to force you in just because they need the money or they want the loyalty or they would hopefully just want lots of students and a successful business for good reasons, but they wouldn't be so insecure that they wouldn't say, do my trial, go do that guy's trial, do that guy's trial. And not to say necessarily even that I'm the best, but just you're going to find a gym you like. And if you don't like mine, might as well find a different one.
Yeah.
There's a funny thing I heard from, this is a Riley Bodycomb trick, where he said he'd have a guy come in who was like real macho and like, the MMA stereotype, come in, kind of thrash around, and just like you could tell he wasn't going to be a good fit for the gym. And Riley would say, you know what? I think you're just too tough for our gym. The guy, yeah, I'm too, he'd leave and go, yeah, like I said, I'm too tough. And to Riley, it's like, whatever, I didn't really want that guy in my gym anyway, probably wouldn't have been fit. But then you're not having to try to sell a guy you don't want, or you're not even blowing him off. You get to go, oh, you're just too tough for us.
Well, the number of times I've seen an instructor not get rid of a bad student just because he wants the income from that one student, but been blind to the fact that that one student has driven off 5 or 10 other students by injuring them or by just belittling them or just being a toxic student. It's incredible, right? Like no one student is worth driving off 5 or 10 other good students for. So that Riley's point there is really smart.
So you're real tough. You should go check out this MMA gym down the street. And cool. Then you just keep all the nice guys you like.
Well, that's awesome. So Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Your website has been around forever, Aesopian.com. You want to spell that for people?
Sure. AESOPIAN.com. It's just my blog for jiu-jitsu stuff. And then there's also a lot on there about another thing we didn't really get into here, but functional range conditioning, which is a system for joint health and athletic training and all kinds of stuff that's good for jiu-jitsu.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been around for more than a decade now. And it does take some digging to get what you want in there. You got to improve the navigation system.
I haven't updated that site in like 10 years.
But there's gold in them there hills, not necessarily monetary gold, but gold for people. Yeah. Please.
I just renewed the domain and I think I've had it for like 16 years. So it's been around. I was going to update it soon. I did do a lot of content the last few years, but it was mostly on Inverted Gear's website. I wrote a lot of content for them. And then for Reddit, we were doing Wipeout Wednesdays, which was where every Wednesday people can post any question they want. Any wipeout can, unashamedly ask the simplest questions. And then me and then Nelson and Hillary from Inverted Gear would go and film 2-3 minute answers to those. And then we had like 200 videos that way, because every Wednesday we would film 10 videos. So there's a bunch of content out there, but my website is the most neglected of them.
Okay. How else can people get in touch with you?
The Aesopian.com is the easiest way. You can find me by looking up Aesopian on any kind of social media. I am one of the moderators on Reddit, the Jiu-Jitsu subreddit. So if you want to look on the side there and message me, I might see it, but I haven't been as active on there lately. And the other spot this is the place I've been most chatty lately, is our mutual friend Steve Kwan on his BJJ Mental Models Discord. Is I'm on there, so that's a good way to chat with me.
So become a Mental Models Patreon supporter and get on the Discord.
There you go. Pay
Awesome.
Steve, and then you can talk to me.
Yes, I see why you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu and not necessarily a black belt in business.
Yeah, I've never been very money motivated, and it shows.
All right, Matt, take care. Thank you so much, and I'm so glad we managed to connect after all these years.
Me too.